Hello, everyone. We are so excited to be here with you on our last author spotlight in celebration of Women's History Month, and where we're highlighting women authors who are telling important stories. Just a quick reminder that we will have resources if you need anything, and of course, that the views expressed during this are the views of the authors themselves and don't reflect the views of Reksha, our sponsors, our funders, or affiliates. All right, so I'm so excited to have Anjali Enjeti here, who is an amazing activist, author, um, writer, journalist, professor here in Georgia to talk about your two upcoming books. Do you want to go ahead and tell us about your two books, Southbound and Parted Earth, right?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much, Aparna. It's such an honor to be here. So my very first book is technically coming out on April 15th. It's called Southbound, Essays on Identity, Inheritance, and Social Change. It is a collection of nonfiction essays where I explore being mixed race. I'm half Indian and a quarter Puerto Rican and a quarter Austrian, and growing up in the Deep South. I moved from Michigan to Chattanooga, Tennessee when I was 10. So I talk a lot about my understanding of racism and white supremacy and what it meant to feel not only othered, but then to also be complicit in systems of power that were not only harmful to me, but to other people. And on May 4th, my debut novel, The Parted Earth, is being released. And it is a book that takes place in over 70 years, starting with the 1947 partition and going to 2017. There are multiple characters. It's about how the legacy of partition is felt for the generations that follow. So the novel centers around a character named Sean Johnson, who is completely disconnected from her Indian ancestors and her heritage, and slowly starts to unravel this story that she realizes started with her grandmother in India in 1947.
You know, as you talk about your first book, Southbound, essays around identity and white supremacy, I keep thinking that this is so apropos for what we're dealing with right now after what just happened here in Atlanta with the shootings. What do you want people to walk away from with this book or these essays, right?
So, I hope people can take a harder look at the ways that they may play into these systems of power that are so damaging to all marginalized people, whether we're talking about Black people or brown people or members of the LGBTQIA community, undocumented people, disabled people, Jewish, Muslim people. We all have various struggles. Many of us are marginalized in multiple ways. And I didn't want to write a book that really focused so much on the ways that I've been dealing with trauma and the traumatic events that I dealt with due to primarily racism. So I wanted to think about, where can I go from here as a human being, right? What can I do with this racialized trauma from my childhood, from my teens, my 20s? And I really wanted to show how I turned it into something else, how it became this sort of external energy that showed me that I can actually build community with it, that I can fuel activism with it, that I can recognize in myself all the ways that I fall short in this struggle for equality and social justice. So I hope that Southbound gives people to really look at themselves in a very honest way. It can be, there can be a lot of shame when you realize that you have in fact contributed to bigotry in certain ways. You have maybe been silent when you shouldn't have been silent, maybe who have ignored something that's happened to somebody else. And there can be shame when you realize that. So I'm hoping that me being honest about it and me really taking a hard critical look at myself and my own behavior and my own past helps people do the same. It's okay if you haven't gotten it right up until now, but let's go forward. Let's now do something about it. Let's become better people. Let's be more just in our everyday behavior, certainly more just than we were the day before. So that's what I'm hoping people get out of it.
When we were talking about this, I was thinking about, we were planning, and the quote that I want to reflect on is like, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better, by Maya Angelou, which I thought was like, how can we be kind to ourselves and not beat ourselves so much, but still go on the path of creating a better pathway once we have that information?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I love that quote. And I think it's so important because sometimes when we feel like we made a terrible mistake and didn't act in a way that we should have, our instinct is to kind of cower away and hide in a corner and not come out of that, right? To not go beyond that moment and not try to do better. Everybody is on their own path, and they're on a different part of that path to justice, right? Some of us have been doing this work for a really long time, so we're much further along in the path. And I often have to remind myself, just because someone isn't as far along in understanding equality and justice doesn't mean I'm any better than them, that they're any worse than I am. Meet them where they are, link arms, and help guide them through what you went through to understanding. I think that's all we can do. We're human beings. We're going to continue to make mistakes, a lot of mistakes. I make them daily.
As do I.
So let's get to a place where we can forgive ourselves, provided that we then change, right? I mean, the forgiveness of what we did wrong should fuel an understanding about how we can do better. And that's all we can ever ask of anybody is how do I improve from where I am now? And then the rest of us need to make sure that, and I'm guilty of this, so the rest of us have to make sure to be as welcoming and non-judgmental as possible for people who are not as far along in their understanding of justice. And I that's my goal. I fall short sometimes in that. I'm not as understanding as I should be. I'm the first to admit it, but that should be the goal, is helping, right, collecting all of us together, doing this as a coalition and walking towards justice, doing the building that needs to happen for this more just world that is just so damaging to so many people and causing so much suffering. And that coming together is so important, no matter where we are in the kind of work that we're doing to make this a better place.
That's beautiful. All right, so let's move on to your second book, The Parted Earth, which talks about, of course, partition and how it impacts many generations, and then how it impacts women of many generations. Do you want to give us a little bit insight of what do you want people to walk away from with that book? And then also, what was the inspiration for it?
So I think there were a few, I'll start with the inspiration question first. So when I graduated from college, I read Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. And I knew about partition before I read that book. I didn't know a ton about partition. I mean, I knew that many, many people had died. I knew that there was a mass migration. And I knew what partition was about, right? That the British had colonized India for a few hundred years. They finally decided to leave, but then they basically literally drew a line in the sand to divide the new nation of India and the new nation of Pakistan, which was then East Pakistan and West Pakistan. Right. So I had a bare bones understanding. And when I read Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, I was not a writer. I had no inkling that I would ever be a writer. I had no idea for a novel. I simply read it because I was about to start law school, and I was an avid reader, and I thought, okay, let me get to know a little bit more about partition. And so I read that book, and I just became obsessed. So I started reading multiple novels about partition, and then I started reading nonfiction about partition. I started looking for it, and this is the mid-1990s, so I was not really that familiar with the internet yet, and it was more easily accessible to me to get books that were published in the U.S. Right? I couldn't really easily figure out how to look for books that were only published in the subcontinent. So I was a little bit more limited in what I could read. But one of the first internet searches that I did was about partition, right? This is when I had a Hotmail account, and I think it was like AOL Online, and I'm like typing in partition, trying to find more information. I was looking at that point for nonfiction information. I was trying to find stories. And what I found was a lot of articles, but I didn't actually find a lot of firsthand testimony when I did those searches in the mid-1990s. And so for the next several years, as I got better and better at using the internet, and as the internet became more easily accessible and more information was put online, I would just search for partition stories. And it wasn't until I went to India in 2011. I went to India for the first time after 19 years. At this point, neither of my grandparents were alive anymore. And I went to India, and I was like freshly grieving my grandparents' loss. My grandfather died when I was very young. I was 17. My grandmother died when I was about 31, 32. So, but I hadn't seen my grandmother in so long. She never met my children. And so when I was in India, I was just awash with this grief for not having my Indian grandparents anymore and the loss of that connection. And then that's when the story started coming to me. All those years of partition reading fused with this longing I had for my Indian grandparents, my Indian heritage. At this point, I had virtually no Indian relatives living in India anymore. My grandparents had passed away. All of my first cousins had left the subcontinent. I had one aunt in Bangalore and an aunt and an uncle in Mysore. That was it. I didn't have any other relatives there. So I felt that loss, right? We were visiting India as like tourists, staying in hotels, as opposed to staying at my grandparents' house or my uncle's house. So it was just those two forces of where I had already done all this research about partition, not for any purpose other than simply educating myself. And then I was missing my grandparents. And then on that trip is when the whole story of the novel came together. Like by the time I flew back to the United States, I knew what the entire novel was going to look like. Wow. But then there's another prong to that, which is that I am 1/4 Puerto Rican. And my Puerto Rican grandfather died when I was 6 years old. He had been estranged from his family for decades before he died due to a tragedy. So Shawn Johnson is estranged from her grandmother in this story. She doesn't have, and her father had passed away young, so she's not at all connected to her Indian heritage at the beginning of the book. I have no connection to any Puerto Rican relatives. I have no connection to my Puerto Rican heritage at all. He was it. When he died when I was 6, I mean, I don't even have a memory, a real memory of him. So when he died, I lost that heritage completely, right? And so that part of Sean, where she's Indian in name only, but doesn't have a connection to it until her neighbor helps her become more connected to her heritage. That part is personal, a little bit personal to me as well.
Powerful stories. I can't wait to read them. I was thinking, and one of the questions I wanted to kind of ask was, and I'm so excited that we're able to do this event based on the fact that we have so many amazing South Asian authors here in Georgia. And our quest was like, how do we highlight some of these amazing authors? What do you think the role of South Asian authors in the South is? And I see Gayatri's in the chat too. One of our really well-known South Asian authors. But like, I've been so excited, because usually you have all these local, you see these powerful South Asian authors, but they're never in Georgia. They're always like in New York, California. And I'm telling you, I am feeling so much love and so much gratitude for the South Asian voices in the South, having grown up and been born and raised in Georgia, that's to me just so powerful. But yeah, what do you see the role of South Asian authors in the South?
We have a really important role here, and we've been here for a really long time. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think anytime you see South Asians in the media, you see them in sort of the large cities in the Northeast, or you see them in Chicago or Houston or, California. So we are somewhat invisible here. Many South Asians came to the Southeast, to the Deep South, right after the Immigration and Naturalization Act was passed in the late 1960s, right on the heels of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So we've been here. My father immigrated to Texas in 1971. We've been here. We've just been, I think, largely invisibilized by media, by publishing, even though we have quite a long history, even though we have such a diverse history here, right? I mean, we've got people here from multiple South Asian countries. We've got people here from with South Asian roots who are from most recently African countries, from Caribbean countries. So there's a wide variety of us here. And it's so great to be in this moment where so many of us are writing. When I first moved here 14 years ago to the Atlanta area, I have met pretty much all of them. And so that just goes to tell you there was not a huge number of writers when I first moved here. Now I don't know many of these writers, which is great. I mean, this is a great feeling, right? To see a South Asian author who's from Georgia and see that they're having a book coming out, and I don't know them, because that means that there's more of us. But we have a lot of very important stories to tell here about being in the South, about what it means to be Southern and from the American South. So it's really exciting to read these types of stories. When what I talk about in Southbound is coming across Devi Laskar's book, The Atlas of Reds and Blues, and how it was just one of the few depictions I'd ever read by a South Asian author about being Southern, about living in the South, living in the Atlanta area. It just felt so good to see myself, because I can't really relate to South Asians who live in the New York City area. Like, I've never lived in New York City. So those stories, I relate very much to the sort of the South Asian prong, right? Mm-hmm. But I wasn't a big city person. I've never lived in a very large city. I can't relate really to the South Asian authors who write about living in California or living in Chicago. I mean, again, it connects with the cultural heritage, but I'm not from those parts of the country. So it feels so wonderful to see us writing and to see us getting the word out about our books and all our stories and connecting with people in that way. It's just really fabulous.
You know, the other thing is that y'all are not just, I mean, y'all are amazing authors and writers, but y'all are change makers. And I tell you, there's a part of me that, you know, for a while I felt really isolated in being, you know, a South Asian trying to make change in the community. And to me, us connecting on so many levels is like, how do we change our community? How do we change our culture? And how do we break those norms, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, from talking about race to talking about gender-based violence to challenging everything that we consider part of our culture. I'm just loving this. It's been so powerful that, you know, we have these voices because y'all are like, I mean, mentors or sisters of my heart. I mean, sisters of my heart, I know that's based on a book, but like, it's just so beautiful to be in community with so many of you all and to see the amazing things that you're challenging. And I feel like with stories, with movies, that's the way our community actually works towards change. They can hear that story so much better than when I'm talking. Mm-hmm. But when there's a book or there's a movie or a play that deals with those issues, you have such an important role in really shifting people and how they think. I don't know if you want to add a comment to that, but I'm totally fangirling here.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think art really helps us be more visible, right? Whatever form that art takes, whether that's a book or, you know, photography or painting or music, dance, whatever form that art takes, it gives us another voice, right? It gives us another visible outlet so that we can see one another doing the work. But I think what another sort of big factor in this is that because numbers wise, we are still a pretty small minority in the United States and in Georgia. In order to create art, in order to express ourselves, we are kind of doing something radical just by expressing ourselves, right? Because you're challenging a norm by simply putting yourself out there, putting your art out there, right? It's really hard, you know, it's really impossible to be a South Asian writer and to like never criticize the very white publishing industry, right? Because when you're a South Asian writer, you know very well that only a couple people get bites at the apple to get their work published. And then everyone else is dismissed because, well, we already have our one or our two or three South Asian authors. So we're not going to do another South Asian, right? Because there's a scarcity of opportunities for art to be made public and get attention. And then if you come from the same racial or ethnic group, you're automatically in competition with one another, yes. Right? I've been on a number of panels with some really amazing writers. And I've talked about this with Jenny Bott, who had a short story collection out last year and a translation, and Sejal Shah, and some other amazing South Asian writers, Devi Laskar, about how like we only get so many opportunities, right? So we are bumping up against that, right? Industries have said they're only going to give a few spots to South Asian people, and they're going to give it to these few, which means everyone else is sort of being shelved. Mm-hmm. And so it's that much more important for us to have forums like this, where we are given a space to talk about what we do and talk about our art, and what it means to us and what we're working on. Because we're not going to get the same opportunities from white publishing. We just aren't, right? One of us might, or two of us might, but we're not all going to get that chance. So we have to build it ourselves. We have to build an infrastructure where our voices and where our art can thrive and be seen, and we can then empower other people, right? We can then empower the South Asian writer who, again, has had another rejection from her work because, somebody says, well, it's not like the other Indian books out there, right? I mean, these are real things that happen in this industry. So I appreciate this forum for many reasons, but for that one as well, is because we are not going to get the same opportunities as South Asian artists as white artists will, authors. That's part of this sort of radical process of us creating and existing, is that we've also got to create the spaces, the stages for us to showcase our work so that we can also hold the microphone and talk about what we do.
Well, and one thing that I've just noticed, and maybe from, externally, I noticed that there is a lot of uplifting of the South Asian authors supporting each other, at least here in Georgia. It may not be true, but like, I know that y'all are in competition with the larger, but I've also seen folks be like, make sure you're also including this author, or make sure, and maybe it's my limited exposure, but I mean, as we're talking about, women's history and women's empowerment, what kind of message would you want to give to other South Asian folks who want to tell stories or highlight each other, and then to other authors? Like, what can we do to make sure that, we're not limited to the spots out there, right? But that all of our stories are relevant and told and put forth.
I would never have been able to publish a book if it wasn't for South Asian women and femme authors. Would not have happened for several reasons. First of all, they are the ones that rallied around me the loudest when I was ready to give up. When I had so many rejections and had shed so many tears in this business. And they were the ones that said, you know what? You be sad and take your time and mourn, and then you get right back out there with your work. If I did not have the South Asian writing community, it would not have happened for me. I would not have pressed submit one more time because I was done. My books are coming out this spring, and I started trying to get books published 13 years ago.
Wow.
You don't last that long in this industry unless you have people who love and support you. And for me, that's mainly been Black and Brown writers, and especially the South Asian community. Let me just give you one example here. So, I'm sort of in the pre-book launch publicity sprint right now. Almost every author that is interviewing me for my books is South Asian. A South Asian woman or femme. Every single person who's reached out. There's like one or two exceptions, and you'll see them when the interviews come out. But they're South Asian because they see me, they see my stories, and they see value in that, right? Not a lot of other people do, right? Gayatri's on here. My gosh, I couldn't have done it without Gayatri. I'm just going to shout her out since she keeps commenting. I mean, I tell you, get a Gayatri in your life. I mean, totally, completely supportive, great feedback, keep going. That's what all of us need. And I don't know what I did to deserve many of these relationships. I probably don't even deserve them. But oh my goodness, I would not be here without it, because I have been at such low points on this publishing journey that I wouldn't have made it without the South Asian women and femmes who've just cheered me on.
Anjali, I just want to say you do deserve every relationship you have. I don't deal with you as much as probably everybody else does, but I always feel like when I'm with you, it's a good connection. So you probably did a lot to deserve Gayatri. And I love that you all love and support each other in whatever you do. So yes, Gayatri, thank you for just being here and for being such a great support and for all that you do, because I know you do really important work and have really important conversations on race and so many other things.
And her book is coming out this summer, Unbelonging, and the cover is amazing.
Okay, Gayatri, can we have you on at some point too?
It's a great book. I had the pleasure of reading it already. I got to read an earlier version of it, and it's gonna be amazing. It's really gonna change the game.
So if y'all want to follow Gayatri is what, Desi Book Auntie on Instagram, is that correct?
Yes. Maybe she'll drop the handle in the chat.
Yeah. Gayatri, put it in the chat so we can support that. Sunita has a question. She says, a lot of us have stories buzzing inside of us, but getting published is yet an entirely different story, pun not intended. Where do I start?
So I think that's a wonderful question. And that's such a hard question to answer. So I think it's really important, especially when you're starting out, to think about the fact that writing is one thing and publishing is something else. And when you are a writer, your job is to produce work and to tell stories that are compelling to you, and to write your heart out, write them to your best of your ability. Publishing is like the judgment arm, right? That's where somebody tells you whether they find your story compelling or not, or whether they find you compelling or not. So it's important when you go into this to devote your time, your energy, and your emotional investment into the writing part. And to know that you are a writer regardless of whether you get published, right? You are a writer. That's the job. That's what you throw yourself into. Publishing may or may not happen exactly how you want it. It may not give you the money that you want. It's very difficult to get to make a living. Most people do not make a living by publishing books. I'm certainly not making a living publishing my books. So if you build your community of writers who will support what you do, who will be there for you to lean on, and then you write your heart out, the journey to publishing will be so much easier than if you spend so much time and energy paying attention to the publishing prong, simply because there's so little reward in it. The reward for me has always really come from writing something I'm proud of. And telling a story that I feel like heals me in some way, makes me feel less alone in the world, makes me feel more connected with other people. So if you're beginning this process, try to remember that. You don't lose yourself in the publishing prong. Make art that you're really proud of and that you really love and that you can really lose yourself in. And then keep yourself at arm's length from the publishing part, right? Submit when you want to submit, but try not to let it take over your mental capacity. Try to not let publishing consume you, because you're an artist when you make the art, and it doesn't matter whether or not that finds the public outlet that you want it to find. Because that part can be really hard. It can take many years. And a lot of people don't have positive experiences publishing books. That's not something we hear a lot about. I'm having a very positive experience, but a lot of writers don't. They don't connect with editors that they have. They end up making changes that they don't want to make. And they end up producing something that they're not proud of. So just hold on to yourself, your identity as a writer, and put a lot of value and energy in that. And try to take publishing and that whole process with a grain of salt.
All right. I know we've got a little bit over time. I don't know if you have, I know that there's another set of questions, if you don't mind. Do you mind?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. So, Shumon Ray, full disclosure, my nephew, says he just ordered some books, both your books, and two questions. What's your favorite? Who is your favorite writer, and what do you do when you have writer's block?
So that's interesting. Okay, so favorite writer. This is a really tough question for me. I never really know the answer because I have so many favorite writers. I really love Zadie Smith. I really love Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, Arundhati Roy. There are just so many writers. I feel like every time I reread their books, they give back to me so much. What do I do when I have writer's block? Okay, hear me out. I feel like so much of the process of writing is in the process of thinking. So I cannot write every day, and there are weeks that I go without writing, but I'm actually thinking about the books and how to resolve a problem when I'm not writing. So have I had writer's block where I technically can't actually type or write anything for that book? Yes, but I've never really considered it writer's block because I find that when I'm not writing, I'm actually trying to work out a problem in the story that I'm trying to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I just went like 2 weeks without adding a single word to the manuscript that I'm working on, which is another novel. And I finally wrote like a scene that's maybe only 3 paragraphs long the other day. And to someone on the outside, that might look like, wow, in 2 weeks, you've written 3 paragraphs. But I resolved a huge problem that I was trying to figure out with these characters and with this story in those 3 paragraphs. So to me, you know, I guess I don't judge like quantity of writing and to determine whether or not I'm blocked or not. So to me, that was a big success. But just know, give yourself credit for the work that you do when you're not writing. I mean, living your life and having experiences is part of the writing process. Going on a walk, that's part of the writing process. Going out to dinner with friends, knitting, watching a really good movie. I mean, when you do all those other activities, it's feeding you, it's nourishing you as an artist. So don't be so hard on yourself and let yourself live your life, and your story will come to you and you will figure it out when you do.
Beautiful. Beautiful. In the interest of time, I'm going to summarize, but if there's anything else you want to add, what I've gotten from this conversation is, number one, build your beloved community, the one that supports you and uplifts you, to be authentic in your writing and your voice, right? And to live your life, right? And Shuman saying, I love that. Thank you for sharing. Always an inspiration, Anjali, Shuman says.
That's good. I'm going to look for his book next then, right?
Right, Shuman, we're waiting. We're waiting. Thank you, Anjali. Are there any parting words before we just end this, I guess, or, you know?
No, I'm just super grateful for your friendship, Aparna. You are such an inspiration to me in what you do, in creating spaces for people and valuing other people's voices. And I just wanted to tell you that I have learned so much from you, and I've done things in my life because I've had people like you in it, to show me how to look at other people and to highlight other people and to really see people for their struggles. So I just want to thank you for creating this space and for continuing to do the work that you've done for over 2 decades. You're just a gem to this community.
Well, we have a lot of great people, and we all keep uplifting each other. And I think that's what I've been learning, is that, you know, we're really lucky to have such amazing individuals, women, men, folks, you know, who define themselves however they define themselves, that we're here in this together. And that if we spend more time uplifting and supporting each other, that we're going to get a lot farther, and that we got to be kind to ourselves. That was the last thing, is that, you know, we can be hard for what we didn't know, but like when we know better, we'll do better, but let's not be hard on ourselves. And I think that's an important message I want to leave with. I'm so glad this was the way we ended our Women's History Month. I think we'll still have some more conversations. So Gayatri, Shuman, be ready. We'll want to talk to y'all later. But as we end this month, I just want to remind us all to continue to tell our stories and inspire and uplift each other, and continue to highlight the amazing people in our lives.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I can't wait for the book to come out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all have a great night and enjoy this beautiful weather.